Arizona carried out 41 executions. Donald Eugene Harding, April 6, 1992, gas chamber. Between December 1979 and January 1980, Harding carried out at least 7 murders across several states, including California, Arizona, Texas, and possibly Arkansas. He was convicted of 3 of those killings, and in 1992, he was put to death in Arizona's gas chamber for 2 of the murders committed in that state. His execution marked Arizona's first since the nationwide reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Harding's death was not officially declared until 10.5 minutes after the cyanide pellets were released. Throughout the execution, he fought violently against the straps that held him down. Television reporter Cameron Harper, who witnessed the event, described Harding's convulsions as lasting 6 minutes and 37 seconds, adding, "Obviously, this man was suffering. This was a violent death, an ugly event. We put animals to death more humanely." Another witness, journalist Carla McLean, recalled, "Harding's death was extremely violent. He was in great pain. I heard him gasp and moan." The execution had such a disturbing impact on observers that one reporter developed insomnia and various health issues for weeks afterward, while 2 others were described as being walking vegetables for several days. Harding ate a last meal consisting of fried eggs, several strips of bacon, toast with butter and honey, and orange juice. His last words were a string of obscenities directed towards the Attorney General. The gruesome nature of his execution fueled the push for Arizona to allow death row prisoners the option of choosing between the gas chamber and lethal injection. John George Brewer, March 3, 1993, lethal injection. Brewer was living in an apartment in Flagstaff with his girlfriend, Rita Breer. In the early hours of November 11, 1987, the two got into an argument, with the tension centered around Brewer's heavy reliance on her. Later that day, Breer told him she was planning to move out, explaining that leaving might force him to learn independence. Brewer reacted violently. He locked the bedroom door and launched into a brutal assault. The fight dragged on as he bit her, tried to gouge her eyes out, and strangled her with his hands. Eventually, he ended her life by tightening a tie around her neck. Breer, who was 22 weeks pregnant at the time, never had a chance to escape. After the killing, Brewer paused to rest, took a shower, and then committed necrophilia by having relations with her body. Once finished, he left the apartment, walked to a nearby bowling alley, phoned the police, and surrendered himself. He later admitted guilt to first-degree murder. He consistently expressed that he was deserving of the death penalty and never appealed for mercy. Unlike Harding, witnesses said he went peacefully with the lethal injection. His last meal was 3 grilled pork chops with gravy, bacon, 6 fried breaded shrimp, beef rice-a-roni, 2 3 slices French bread with butter, applesauce, 2 cans Canada Dry ginger ale with ice, 1 slice coconut cream pie, 1 pint orange juice, 1 can chicken noodle soup with crackers, 1 can pear halves with syrup, Maxwell House coffee with cream and sugar. He didn't have any last words. James Dean Clark, April 14, 1993, lethal injection. In 1977, Clark spent much of the year working as a wrangler on a ranch in Elfrida, Arizona. On the morning of December 4, his time there took a horrific turn when he murdered 2 fellow ranch hands, George Martin Jr. and 17-year-old Gerald McFerrin. Martin was stabbed repeatedly in the chest, while McFerrin, who was also asleep when attacked, was shot 3 times in the head. Clark didn't stop there. Armed with a gun, he made his way to the home of the ranch owners, Charles and Mildred Thumb. He shot Charles twice, then killed Mildred with a bullet to the head as she slept. After the murders, Clark looted the house, taking money, credit cards, and jewelry. Before leaving, he slashed the tires of all the vehicles on the property to delay discovery, and then stole the Thumbs' car, driving it to El Paso. When speaking later to a friend, Clark boasted about the killings, remarking, "You should have seen Charlie when I hit him with those cutters." Upon his arrest, police discovered that he had even kept a grisly souvenir from the crimes, the bullet that had passed through the skull of one of his victims. For his last meal, he had porterhouse steak, medium rare, 2 pounds of large shrimp and sauce, A1 steak sauce, baked potato with sour cream, coleslaw, banana cream pie, rice pudding with raisins, 2 dinner rolls with butter, and a strawberry milkshake. His last words were directed to his wife, a woman he met while incarcerated. He said, "I love you," and then a few minutes later, he was dead. Jimmy Wayne Jeffers, September 13, 1995, lethal injection. In May 1976, Jimmy Wayne Jeffers and his girlfriend Penelope Cheney were taken into custody on charges of narcotics possession and receiving stolen property. Jeffers was unable to post his own bond, though he managed to secure it for Cheney, leaving him behind bars. While incarcerated, he discovered that Cheney had been cooperating with the police, providing information about his heroin operation. In retaliation, Jeffers attempted to hire another inmate to kill her, but a correctional officer intercepted the letter containing his plan. Upon securing his release in October, Jeffers immediately began plotting revenge against Cheney. He soon met a woman named Doris Van der Veer and moved in with her at a motel in Tucson. On October 20, 1976, Jeffers lured Cheney to the motel by offering her drugs. Once Cheney arrived, Van der Veer left the room, giving Jeffers an opportunity to be alone with her. When Van der Veer returned, she found Jeffers pointing a gun at her and instructing her to sit down. Van der Veer then saw Cheney lying on the bed unconscious, foam at her mouth, a sign of a heroin overdose. As a former nurse, she immediately recognized the severity of the situation. Jeffers coldly remarked that he had given her enough to kill a horse, and this girl still won't die. He proceeded to choke Cheney with her belt. When Van der Veer tried to intervene, he dismissed her concerns, claiming he had seen Cheney survive similar situations before. Even after Van der Veer checked Cheney's pulse and confirmed she was dead, Jeffers insisted that she inject the body with more heroin. He also physically assaulted Cheney, berating her with each strike. For 3 days, he left her body in the shower stall. When the stench became unbearable, the two wrapped Cheney's corpse in plastic and buried it in a shallow grave in a secluded area near Sedona. For his last meal, after requesting 3 pounds prime rib, 1 pound of crab legs, and 3 lobster tails, which DOC considered too extravagant, he was instead given 10-ounce steak, peas, rolls with butter, 1 baked potato with shredded cheddar cheese, strawberry pie with whipped cream, large chocolate malt. For his last words, he let loose a string of obscenities and then made an obscene gesture to his executioners and witnesses. Darren Lee Bolton, June 19, 1996, lethal injection. On the night of June 27, 1986, Bolton abducted a 2.5-year-old girl from her bedroom in her Tucson home. He carried her to an abandoned taxi, stripped her, essayed her, stabbed her once in the chest, and then dressed her again before leaving her to die. Her body was found several days later, on July 1st, by boys playing in the area. Bolton became a key suspect in Zosha's case in November 1990, when Illinois authorities, using the state's automated fingerprint indexing system, matched prints found on the window at the girl's home and in the abandoned vehicle to his own. Tucson police had submitted the prints to all states using the system in 1987, but Arizona did not participate. Bolton's prints were already on file in Illinois due to prior assault convictions in Champaign in 1984 and 1985. Remarkably, the match came during a routine training session for Illinois State Police officers. By this time, Bolton was already serving a prison sentence in Arizona for unrelated charges, including kidnapping, essay, and indecent exposure. Once he was charged with Zosha's murder, detectives linked him to the 1982 essay and murder of 7-year-old Katie Fritz, also in Tucson. He faced charges for her death as well. Court records paint a grim picture of Bolton's early life. He was shuffled between 2 unhappy, unstable, divorced parents. His mother forced him to stay awake all night watching TV with her, punishing him with a strap whenever he dozed off, and at one point nearly killed him with a knife. His father was equally abusive, calling him a loser and claiming he would achieve nothing. He frequently used physical violence to communicate and introduced Bolton to alcohol, Mary Jane, and cocaine at an early age. Bolton's father praised only the high marks on his school report cards, punishing him violently for anything less than an A or B, including once forcing his head through a plaster wall for lower grades. By the time he dropped out in the 11th grade, Bolton had already accumulated multiple assault charges. A court psychologist later reported that as a teenager, Bolton exhibited suicidal tendencies, reflecting the trauma and abuse that had shaped his formative years. He didn't have any last words, nor a last special meal. Louis Morin Mata, August 22, 1996, lethal injection. On the evening of March 10, 1977, Luis Mata and his brother Alonso were in their Phoenix apartment with Deborah Lopez. When Lopez attempted to leave, Luis stopped her and declared that they were going to essay her. Both brothers then beat her with a rifle and their fists before essaying her. After the attack, they drove Lopez away from the apartment. Luis Mata ultimately murdered her by slashing her throat with a knife, nearly decapitating her in the process. Alonso Mata was also convicted in connection with Lopez's murder and originally sentenced to death, though his sentence was later reduced to life imprisonment. Alonso later claimed that he, not Luis, had been the one to kill Lopez, but the courts dismissed his confession. During the trial, defense attorneys alleged that Judge Stanley Godfarb used racial slurs, specifically referring to Mata as a wetback. However, a later ruling determined that the judge had merely repeated language used by the defense in court. Years after his sentencing, Luis Mata's legal team argued that he had been born with hydrocephalus, which is water in the brain, and had sustained brain damage as a result of childhood abuse. Despite these claims, Mata remained on death row for over 19 years before his execution. For his last meal, he had 2 beef burritos, 2 pork chops, French fries, and jalapenos. He didn't have any last words. Randy Greenawalt, January 23, 1997, lethal injection. Greenawalt received a life sentence for the 1974 murder of a trucker who was asleep in his cab at an Interstate 40 rest stop near Winslow, Arizona. In a chilling act, Greenawalt marked an X on the trucker's door near his head before shooting him through it. He later admitted to killing another trucker in Arkansas as well as a man in Colorado. On July 30, 1978, Greenawalt escaped from Arizona State Prison alongside Gary Tyson, aided by Gary's son Ricky, Ray, and Donnie. The following night, the group committed a horrifying spree in Yuma County, kidnapping and murdering John and Donelda Lyons, their 2-year-old son Christopher, and their teenage niece Teresa Tyson with a shotgun. Afterward, the gang traveled north, changing vehicles multiple times, and appeared to have murdered the newlywed couple, James and Margene Judge, in Colorado, before taking the Judge's van and heading south again. On August 11, 1978, the gang evaded a roadblock in Pinal County, but during a subsequent attempt to stop the van, law enforcement fired on it, killing Donnie Tyson. Greenawalt, along with Ricky and Raymond Tyson, were apprehended, while Gary Tyson managed to escape into the desert, only to be found dead several days later. Ricky and Raymond, both under 20 at the time, were initially sentenced to death, though their sentences were later reduced to life imprisonment on appeal. The search for the Tyson gang became the largest manhunt in Arizona history, exposing flaws in the state's prison system, where favored inmates had unusually lax oversight. Their story was later adapted into a made-for-TV movie starring Robert Mitchum as Gary Tyson. Greenawalt himself endured 19 years of legal proceedings before his execution. His last meal was a cheeseburger, fries, coffee with milk. His last words were, "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine." William Lyle Woroczek, June 25, 1997, lethal injection. Linda Louise Leslie, a 36-year-old woman who functioned mentally at the level of a 15-year-old, rented a small sleeping room from Woroczek in Pinal County. In the early hours of March 6, 1980, around 2:30 a.m., Woroczek entered her room and launched a brutal attack. He beat Leslie with a hammer, stabbed her 3 times with a steak knife, and strangled her with such force that bones in her neck were broken. After the murder, he stole roughly $107 and set the shed on fire, incinerating her body. On the day of his execution, at the moment he was strapped to the lethal injection table, Woroczek declared, "I want the state of Arizona to know they are executing an innocent man. Tell my wife I love her and tell the rest of my family I love them." His attorneys and family maintained until the end that his conviction rested solely on circumstantial evidence. The most significant proof against him was found on the clothing he wore that night, which contained bodily fluids that could have belonged to Leslie and fibers matching the carpet at the crime scene. Woroczek consistently claimed he did not kill Leslie. He was unsure who did and believed certain key facts had never been fully investigated at trial. In a telephone interview from death row, he revealed that although married at the time, he did have a relationship with Leslie and had introduced other men to her so they could also have relations with her. Among these men, he alleged, was a Casa Grande police officer. While his attorneys did not fully endorse Worotek's conspiracy theory, they argued that law enforcement abandoned the investigation too quickly and failed to explore other potential suspects. Worotek spent 17 years submitting appeals before his execution. His last meal was 16-ounce top sirloin steak medium rare, French fries, onion rings, 12 deep-fried butterfly shrimp, 1 whole cherry cheesecake, 1 case Pepsi Cola, 1 pot of coffee. Jose Jesus Ceja, January 21, 1998, lethal injection. On Sunday, June 30, 1974, Ceja targeted the Phoenix home of Randy and Linda Leon with the intent to steal a large shipment of Mary Jane. Upon entering the house, he encountered Linda, who apparently resisted him. Ceja shot her twice in the chest before dragging her into the bedroom, where he fired at least 4 additional close-range shots to her head. When Randy returned home, Ceja used his own gun, which he had taken from a drawer, to shoot him 4 times. After committing the murders, Ceja packed a suitcase he had brought with him with 12 kilos of Mary Jane. To mask his actions, he removed the telephone receiver and left the television on, creating the illusion that someone was home. In a chilling display of deception, Ceja later attended the victims' funeral, assisted in moving their furniture, and even offered to help law enforcement track down the killer. On the day of his execution, at 12:01 a.m. Arizona time, the drapes were drawn open and Ceja lifted his head, spotting one of the witnesses. He smiled and even gave a wink. When asked if he had any final words, he simply replied, "No, that's all right." As the death warrant was read aloud, Ceja's eyes blinked rapidly. 1 minute later, at 12:02, the lethal injection began coursing through his veins. During the process, his eyes continued to flutter, and he heaved 3 times. His mouth twitched, and it appeared as though he was exhaling air. At 12:05, Corrections Director Terry Stewart officially pronounced him dead. Ceja lay restrained on the gurney, his pale arms tightly strapped, a white sheet covering him from the waist down, and wearing a short-sleeved shirt. His last meal was 2 red chili beef burritos, 2 cans Coke Classic, 1 sliced cherry pie. Jose Roberto Villafuerte, April 22, 1998, lethal injection. On February 22, 1983, Villafuerte was arrested near Ash Fork following a disturbance while driving a car belonging to Amelia Chauville. He told authorities that Chauville, his girlfriend, and he had argued the previous day in his Phoenix trailer. He claimed that he had loosely tied her to prevent her from calling the police before leaving the trailer. When Phoenix officers entered the trailer, they discovered Chauville's body on the bed. She was clothed only in a blouse, bra, and panties, with her hands bound behind her back. One of her ankles had been tied to her hands with a strip of bedding, and her head was wrapped in a blood-stained sheet, bedspread, and long thermal underwear. A tightly wrapped strip of sheet had been forced into her throat. Laboratory tests confirmed the presence of genetic material. Authorities concluded that Chauville died from gagging. Prosecutors alleged that Villafuerte had viciously beaten her and left her blood-soaked and restrained while she was still alive. They claimed it took the 47-year-old mother of 3 roughly 24 hours to die, ultimately choking on the rolled-up strip of sheet. Although Villafuerte, a Honduran national married to another woman at the time, admitted to assaulting Chauville, he insisted that he instructed 2 friends to untie her after he left the trailer. He claimed that those friends were the ones who essayed her and left her to die. Villafuerte remained on death row for more than 14 years before his execution. On the day of the execution, witnesses noted that the 45-year-old man displayed no remorse, claiming that he loved everybody and telling the victim's son that he would soon be with the Lord. His last meal was 1 broiled chicken, 9 corn tortillas, 2 tomatoes, 1 can of jalapenos, 2 cans of Pepsi, 1 4-ounce plate of rice. Arthur Martin Ross, April 29, 1998, lethal injection. On April 10, 1990, Arthur Ross contacted a 26-year-old real estate agent, presenting himself as a businessman interested in leasing a vacant office at the corner of Vina and Torneydale in Tucson. When the victim met Ross at the office, Ross shot him twice in the head with a 9mm handgun. After the murder, Ross stole the victim's wallet, which contained a credit card, bank card, and identification. He then used the bank card to withdraw roughly $800 from the victim's account at ATMs in Tucson and Casa Grande. Concerned by his unexplained absence, the victim's roommate and co-worker checked his appointment book and went to the office building where they discovered his body. Investigators tracked a series of credit and bank card transactions, which ultimately led to Ross's arrest in Casa Grande on April 14, 1990. He had no final words. His last meal was 3 grilled cheese and fried egg sandwiches, macaroni and cheese, a pint of mint chocolate chip ice cream, and 2 cans of Pepsi. Douglas Edward Gretzler, June 3, 1998, lethal injection. On November 3, 1973, Gretzler and Willie Luther Stillman confronted Michael Sandberg at gunpoint in the parking lot of his Tucson condominium complex, forcing him into his home where his wife, Patricia, was studying. Once inside, they bound and gagged both Sandbergs. As night fell, Gretzler shot Michael while he lay restrained on the bed, then fatally shot Patricia as she remained bound on the living room couch. Stillman fired an additional shot into her body. After the murders, the pair stole the couple's credit cards, checks, camera, and car before fleeing to California. Authorities eventually apprehended Gretzler and Stillman in California, bringing an end to a violent crime spree that claimed at least 9 lives. Stillman was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, but died in prison in 1987. Just before his execution, 47-year-old Douglas Gretzler said, "From the bottom of my soul, I am so deeply sorry and have been for years for murdering Patricia and Michael Sandberg. Though I am being executed for that crime, I apologize to all 17 victims and their families." His last meal was 6 fried eggs over easy, 4 strips of chewy bacon, 2 slices of buttered white bread toast, 1 cup of coffee, 2 Cokes. Derek Leonard Gerlaw, February 3, 1999, lethal injection. On January 24, 1980, Gerlaw, Joseph Encinas, and Matthew Leisure set out from Chandler to Phoenix with a deadly plan: to hitchhike and rob anyone who offered them a ride. Their victim was Scott Schwartz, a man with a leg injury who relied on a leg brace and crutches for mobility. At gunpoint, the three forced Schwartz to drive them to a remote location on the outskirts of Mesa. Once there, they launched a brutal attack. Gerlaw directed Encinas and Leisure to hold Schwartz on the road while he repeatedly ran over him with a car, deliberately positioning the left rear tire on Schwartz's body and revving the engine to ensure fatal injuries. Because Schwartz appeared to still be alive, Gerlaw and Leisure stabbed him 30 to 40 times in the head, neck, and shoulders with a screwdriver. They then abandoned his body in a nearby field, took $36 from him, and fled in his car. Following a joint trial, Gerlaw and Encinas were convicted of murder. Encinas received a life sentence. Leisure pled guilty to first-degree murder and was also sentenced to life. In 1987, Gerlaw was stabbed twice in the back by another inmate as prisoners returned from breakfast. Gerlaw became the first Native American executed in Arizona since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. As part of his final rites, the Department of Corrections permitted him 2 hours in a sweat lodge to pray and purify himself, marking the first time a Native American with a death warrant was allowed this ancient ceremonial practice before execution. He didn't have any last words. His last meal was New York steak cooked medium rare, Worcester sauce, 2 eggs, 8 strips bacon, 2 slices bread toasted with butter, half a pint of peppermint ice cream, and 16 ounces apple juice. Karl-Heinz LeGrand, February 24, 1999, lethal injection. Shortly after 8 a.m. on January 7, 1982, Karl LeGrand and his brother Walter entered the Valley National Bank in Marana. Armed with a toy pistol, Karl attempted to coerce 63-year-old branch manager Ken Hartstock into opening the vault, but Hartstock was unable to comply, having only half of the combination. Frustrated, the brothers forced Hartstock and bank clerk Don Lopez into the office and bound them. They threatened Hartstock with a letter opener and began violently assaulting him. Hartstock ultimately succumbed to 24 stab wounds. Karl and Walter also attempted to murder Lopez, stabbing her 6 times before fleeing the bank. Following a jury trial, both were convicted on all charges. After considering mitigating and aggravating circumstances, the judge sentenced both defendants to death. Karl LeGrand's last meal was 2 bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches on white bread, mayo, 4 fried eggs over easy, medium portion of hash brown potatoes, 2 breakfast rolls, a small portion of strawberry jelly, 1/2 pint of pineapple sherbet ice cream, 1 22-ounce of hot coffee, black, 1 medium slice of German chocolate cake with coconut caramel icing, 1 12-ounce cup of cold milk. His last words were, "I want to apologize to the family of Ken Hartsock and to the woman injured in the robbery attempt, Dawn Lopez." Walter Bernard LeGrand, March 3, 1999, gas chamber. Walter LeGrand was executed a week after his brother, but he chose to die in the gas chamber. His last meal was 6 fried eggs cooked over easy, 16 strips of bacon, 1 large portion of hash browns, 1 pint of pineapple sherbet ice cream, 1 breakfast steak well done, 1 16-ounce cup filled with ice, 1 7-Up, 1 Dr. Pepper, 1 Coke, 1 portion of hot sauce, 1 cup of coffee, 2 packets of sugar, and 4 Roloids tablets. In his last words, LeGrand apologized to the families of his victims first. "To all my loved ones, I hope they find peace. To all of you here today, I forgive you, and I hope I can be forgiven in my next life." As a white steam-like mist filled the room, LeGrand began coughing, shaking his head and gagging several times. A few minutes later, his head slumped forward. He coughed again, lifted his head briefly, and then slumped forward once more. After that, he did not lift his head again, though over the next several minutes his shoulders continued to move involuntarily. The brothers were born in Augsburg, Germany, and moved to southern Arizona as children after their mother married an American serviceman. Carl was the first German citizen executed in the U.S. since World War II. The case drew widespread attention in Germany, which has no death penalty, prompting repeated diplomatic protests and an appeal to an international court. Governor Jane Hall rejected appeals from German Foreign Minister Joschka Fischer and Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder to stay the execution. Robert Wayne Vickers, May 5, 1999, lethal injection. Vickers entered Arizona's prison system as a teenager in 1977 after committing 12 burglaries in just 13 days in Tempe, later confessing to 33 additional burglaries in California. His first known murder in prison was of fellow inmate Frank Ponciano. Vickers had deliberately chosen Ponciano as a cellmate because he owned a TV. When Ponciano failed to wake Vickers for lunch and drank his Kool-Aid, Vickers strangled him and repeatedly stabbed him with a sharpened toothbrush. He then carved the Japanese war cry bonsai misspelled into Ponciano's back, earning himself the nickname Bonsai Bob in prison. To prove to a guard that Ponciano was dead, Vickers burned a cigarette on his foot. By March 4, 1982, Vickers was on death row at the Arizona State Penitentiary in Florence for Ponciano's murder. Around 6:30 p.m. that day, while supposedly performing cleanup duties outside his cell, he targeted another death row inmate, Wilmar Buster Holsinger. Vickers harbored resentment over an earlier comment Holsinger had made about Vickers' niece. Vickers had constructed a firebomb using hair gel and ice cream carton, which he used to set Holsinger's cell ablaze. When a guard inquired whether Holsinger was dead, Vickers chillingly replied, "He should be, he's on fire." Holsinger died from burns caused by the flash fire, and several other inmates were nearly killed from smoke inhalation, forcing officials to evacuate death row. Vickers spent 17 years on death row before his execution. On the day of his execution, he lifted his head from the gurney, smiling and nodding at his relatives, including his aunt and cousin. He greeted them calmly, saying, "Hello everybody, see you later." Moments later, he mouthed to his family, "Time to go." At 3:03 p.m., the lethal chemicals began flowing into his veins, and he was pronounced dead just 2 minutes later. His last meal was green chili burros, burritos with barbecued steak, French fries and ketchup, vanilla ice cream, cream soda, and a cigarette. Michael Kent Polland, June 16, 1999, lethal injection. On May 24, 1977, Purolator guards Russell Dempsey and Cecil Newkirk left Phoenix in an armored van to make their bank deliveries in Prescott, Sedona, and Flagstaff. At the Bumblebee Road exit on Interstate 17, they were stopped by Michael and Patrick Polland, who were disguised as highway patrol officers and driving a car equipped with emergency lights. The brothers took the guards captive and stole nearly $300,000 in cash. The next day, authorities discovered the abandoned armored van. That morning, Michael rented a boat at the Lake Mead Marina and met his brother at a remote landing. They placed the guards into canvas bags, transported them across the lake, and dumped them into the water. The bodies resurfaced 3 weeks later in a cove on the Nevada side of the lake. The Polans were later convicted in federal court for robbery and kidnapping and in state court for murder. Michael Poland was executed by lethal injection more than 20 years after the crime. When asked if he had any final words, he remarked that he was hungry, joking, "I'd like to know if you're going to bring me lunch afterward. I'm really hungry. I can't think of anything else." During the reading of his death warrant, he lifted his head several times to glance towards the witness chamber and mouthed, "I love you," to two of his sons and the daughter-in-law who were present. His last meal was 3 fried eggs, sunny side up, 4 slices of bacon, order of hash browns, 2 slices of whole wheat toast with 2 pats of real butter, 2 individual serving size boxes of Raisin Bran cereal, 2 cartons of milk, 2 cups of Taster's Choice coffee. Patrick Gene Poland, March 15, 2000, lethal injection. Just like his brother, Patrick was also sentenced to death. Strapped to the gurney, Poland looked out at the witnesses and offered apologies for the victim's family, Cecil Newkirk and Russell Dempsey. "I'm sincere. I'm sorry for the pain and suffering I have caused. I do thank you for your forgiveness." He also sought forgiveness from his family and friends, adding, "And I ask the woman I love to remember I will always love her," referring to his girlfriend, Sherry Jo Christensen, who was present. Earlier, he had mouthed "I love you" to Christensen and blown her a kiss. At 3:03 p.m., the lethal chemicals began flowing into his veins. Poland's head jerked 4 times, his body shook slightly, and his head rolled to the side as his eyes closed. He was pronounced dead at 3:07 p.m. He did not want a final special meal. Ignacio Alberto Ortiz, October 27, 1999, lethal injection. Ortiz had been involved in an affair with Manuelita McCormack, the mother of his 3-year-old godson. When Mrs. Cormack reconciled with her husband, Ortiz attempted to resume the relationship. On the evening of December 21, 1978, Ortiz went to the McCormack home while Mr. McCormack was away. There, he strangled and stabbed Mrs. McCormack and also stabbed her 9-year-old and 8-year-old daughters. He then poured gasoline throughout the house and over Mrs. McCormack's body, placing a delayed ignition device at the foot of the 3-year-old's bed. Before igniting the blaze, Ortiz instructed the children to remain in the house until the fire department arrived. The children survived, but Mrs. McCormack did not. While awaiting trial in the state prison system, Ortiz was also convicted of attempted first-degree murder and conspiracy for plotting to kill other members of the McCormack family. He had solicited a fellow inmate to carry out the plan, though no action was taken. Ortiz claimed he had been home sleeping at the time of the murders. However, he was found in possession of the hunting knife and gas can used in the attack, and his fingerprints were on a matchbook used to start the fire. A neighbor testified that Ortiz's truck had been parked behind the McCormack home the night of the slaying. When asked if he had any final words, Ortiz said, "Jesus Christ is the Lord. Heavenly Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Ortiz did not address the McCormack family members present in the witness room or offer them an apology. Only one of the daughters attended the execution. Ortiz, a Catholic, repeated his prayer in Spanish with his eyes closed. As the lethal injection began at 3:04 p.m., his chest heaved twice and his head tilted slightly towards the witness room. He was pronounced dead at 3:05 p.m. Among the 29 witnesses were Ortiz's elderly mother, Isabel Rodriguez, his lead attorney, Sean Bruner, and members of the McCormack family, including Charles McCormack Jr. and 2 of his children, Patricia McCormack Ramirez and Charles McCormack III. His last meal was 2 fried eggs, hot sauce, bacon, sirloin steak, French fries, ketchup, 1 pint of vanilla ice cream, 1 pint of milk, and 1 cup of hot coffee. Anthony Lee Cheney, February 16, 2000, lethal injection. Cheney and his wife Deanna, though he was legally married to another woman, began their crime spree outside of Arizona, burglarizing several homes in other states before crossing into Arizona. At one house, they found multiple firearms, which Cheney, described as a gun nut with extensive knowledge of weapons, decided to re-burgle later to ensure he didn't miss anything. While in New Mexico, the pair came across a late-model black Ford pickup with license plates reading WMD. They transferred their stolen goods into the truck and abandoned their own vehicle somewhere in the state. As the 1982 Labor Day holiday began, they entered Arizona and, wary of roadblocks set up by the Department of Public Safety to catch drunk drivers, decided to camp in a remote area until the holiday ended. Their presence drew the attention of a Coconino County Sheriff's deputy, who found it unusual for anyone to be camping there and moved to investigate. When the deputy approached the campsite, he called in the truck's description. Cheney exited the vehicle and, when asked for identification, claimed it was in his truck and that he would retrieve it. While the deputy spoke with Deanna, Cheney returned with a gun pointed at the deputy's head. Deanna handed over the deputy's sidearm and Cheney demanded her AR-15 rifle. He then ordered the deputy to kneel. Fearing for his life, the deputy attempted to reason with Cheney, mentioning his family and suggesting he could handcuff him to a tree to facilitate an escape. Meanwhile, the dispatcher determined the pickup was stolen and tried to inform the deputy, ultimately calling a second officer, who would become the victim, to investigate. Cheney, seeking more control of the situation, handcuffed the first deputy to a tree, instructed Deanna to disable the two-way radio in his vehicle, and took its keys. After they drove off, the handcuffed deputy eventually freed himself with a spare key and ran to the radio. Soon after, the second officer encountered Cheney's vehicle. Cheney jumped out, firing his AR-15 at the deputy as he attempted to avoid the bullets, which shattered glass and sent debris flying. Over 30 rounds were fired, with one bullet nearly severing the deputy's left arm. Cheney approached the officer from behind and fired again, leaving powder burns on his body. Returning to the truck, Cheney told Deanna, "Murder one," and instructed her to reload. The victim, a doctor and party-time deputy, remained conscious for about 30 minutes, repeatedly telling medics, I'm dying, I can't breathe." Later, Cheney and Deanna encountered two boys in another pickup. Cheney threatened the driver with his gun, forced the boys to kneel, and transferred stolen goods into the vehicle. Before letting them go, he warned the boys that he had handcuffed one deputy and shot another. The pair then drove to Flagstaff to refuel the stolen truck. Police quickly identified the vehicle and moved in, though Cheney remarked that he was surrounded by officers who had yet to realize his presence. When authorities realized the element of surprise was gone, they prepared to intervene. His last meal was 2 eggs over easy, 4 slices of bacon, 1 pint of vanilla ice cream, 1 can of peaches, and strawberry jam. He didn't have any last words. Donald J. Miller, November 8, 2000, lethal injection. Jennifer Guder went to a drive-in with her boyfriend Jose Luna and an acquaintance, Miller. Unbeknownst to her, Luna had enlisted Miller's help in killing Jennifer over a dispute regarding $50 in child support payments. Luna and Miller drove Jennifer to Mount Lemmon, where Luna shot her once in the head. Jennifer struggled to survive and attempted to hide under her car. They later transported her to a remote desert area, where Miller shot her 5 more times in the head. Luna pled guilty to first-degree murder and received a life sentence, while Miller waived federal appeals and received the death penalty. Before his execution, Miller addressed his final words to his mother, a friend, and a relative of his victim. He began by saying to his mother, "First of all, Mom, I love you. Sorry to put you through all of this. I'm sorry, but I needed to." He then spoke to a friend, "Richard, it was good to know you. Take care of my mom." Miller also spoke to the younger brother of Jennifer, who was present in the witness room. "Matthew, I think that's you. I apologize because I didn't take the bullet for your sister, because I understand that you missed the Little League Championship game. You can't go back to play the game your team won." He concluded with a prayer. "Heavenly Father, in the name of Jesus Christ, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Although I walk through the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. Mom, I love you." That's it. His last meal was 2 guacamole tostadas, 2 tacos, 1 strawberry malt, 1 Dr. Pepper, 1 lemon meringue pie, 5 whole jalapenos, 1 lemon, 1 lime, 1 quart of strawberry ice cream. Robert Charles Comer, May 22, 2007, lethal injection. Comer and his girlfriend, Huneva Willis, were staying at a campground near Apache Lake when they invited Larry Pritchard, who was at a neighboring campsite, to join them for dinner and drinks. Around 9 p.m., Comer shot Pritchard in the head and later stabbed him in the neck. He took Pritchard's emergency medical technician badge from his pocket, while Willis concealed Pritchard's body by covering it with wood. After the murder, Comer and Willis returned to Pritchard's campsite and stole several of his possessions, including his dog. They then approached the campsite of Jane Jones and Richard Smith, posing as Arizona Drug Enforcement officers. At gunpoint, they forced Jones and Smith out of their tent. Comer displayed the EMT badge, tied the couple up with wire and duct tape, placed them in their truck, and took items from their tent. While driving the truck, Jones asked to relieve herself. Comer allowed her but accompanied her into the woods and essayed her. When the truck ran out of gas, Comer, Willis, and Jones, along with Willis's two children, continued on together. During this time, Comer shot Pritchard's dog and essayed Jones twice more. Jones ultimately managed to escape while Comer was repairing the truck and was later rescued by a passing motorist. His final statement was, "Go Raiders." His final meal was fried okra, 4 buns with butter, salt, banana bread. Jeffrey Timothy Landrigan, October 26, 2010, lethal injection. Chester Dean Dyer was a 42-year-old man who worked at a health club and was known for bringing men back to his apartment. On the night of his death, Dyer called friends to say he was with a man named Jeff. Not long after, he was found strangled with an electrical cord and stabbed repeatedly inside his home. A deck of pornographic playing cards was scattered across his bed, and investigators discovered a shoe print and spilled sugar on the kitchen floor that matched Landringan's shoes. When questioned, Landringan admitted to beating Dyer after he claimed Dyer made unwanted sexual advances. However, he insisted another man had carried out the actual killing. Throughout his trial, Landringan was combative and uncooperative, frequently disrupting proceedings. At sentencing, he made his defiance clear, telling the judge, "If you want to give me the death penalty, bring it on, I'm ready." Landrigan's early life had been marked by turmoil and violence. Abandoned as an infant, he never met his biological father, who himself died on death row in Arkansas. His grandfather was fatally shot by police while robbing a drugstore. By 1982, at just 20 years old, Landringan was living in Oklahoma when he stabbed to death a childhood friend. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, but the conviction was later overturned. He agreed to a plea deal for second-degree murder and received a 20-year sentence instead. In 1989, while serving that sentence, Landringan escaped from a minimum security prison work crew and fled to Arizona, where he would commit his second murder. His final words were, "Well, I'd like to say thank you to my family for being here and all my friends and Boomer Sooner." Sooners is the team nickname at the University of Oklahoma. His last meal was steak, fried okra, French fries, strawberry ice cream, and a Dr. Pepper. Eric John King, March 29, 2011, lethal injection. Just after midnight, a Phoenix convenience store became the scene of a deadly robbery. A black male armed with a pistol entered the market and during the course of the crime shot and killed both the store clerk, 46-year-old Ron Barman, and the security guard, 61-year-old Richard Butts. The entire incident was captured on 2 surveillance cameras. The footage clearly showed the gunman, dressed in a distinctive sweater, shooting the clerk. No customers were inside at the time. The security guard was later discovered outside by a passing motorist, lying on the ground with his holster empty. While calling 911, the witness saw a man in the same sweater approach the fallen guard and wipe down the holster and belt with a cloth. Nikita Renee Hill, who lives nearby, testified that she saw King, whom she knew personally, walking toward the dumpster shortly after the crime. She watched him toss a thin plastic bag inside. Police recovered the bag and found a gun along with a dark sweater patterned with white diamonds, the same sweater Hill had seen King wearing earlier that night. Michael Jones, Hill's boyfriend, also took the stand. He said that he had gone to the short stop with King to buy wine, but stayed outside while King went inside. Moments later, he heard gunshots. Looking toward the store, he saw King emerging with a gun in hand, while the security guard lay motionless on the ground near the entrance. Jones was eventually released and never charged in connection with the murders. At the time of the killings, King had only recently regained his freedom after serving 7 years in prison for essay and kidnapping. He did not have any final words. His last meal was fried catfish, collard greens, candied yams, cornbread, chocolate cake with ice cream, and cream soda. Donald Edward Beatty, May 25, 2011, lethal injection. Christy Ann Fornoff was only 13 years old when she vanished while out collecting payments on her newspaper route at an apartment complex in Tempe. Her sudden disappearance triggered an immediate response. Police scoured the property with dogs while her parents and neighbors went door to door searching for any trace of her. 2 days later, the complex's maintenance worker, Richard Beatty, was spotted standing beside her body, which had been wrapped in a sheet and placed next to a trash bin. When another man came upon the scene, Beatty claimed he had just discovered the body himself and had already called police, though in reality he had made no such call. Investigators quickly tied Beatty to the crime. Inside his apartment closet, police discovered vomit that matched the victim's, as well as hairs consistent with those found on her body. At his first trial, the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict, resulting in a mistrial. But prosecutors soon learned that while in custody, Beatty had confessed to a jail psychiatrist. A court order compelled the doctor to testify, and on the witness stand, he revealed that Beatty admitted he had not meant to kill Christie. Instead, he said he put his hand over her mouth to stifle her screams, causing her to choke and suffocate on her own vomit. With this confession, along with the physical evidence, the jury found Beatty guilty of the girls' murder, and he was sentenced to death. His final words were, "I just want to say to the Fornoff family, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. God will let you see her again. Freddie, I love you, I kept my promise. Thank you for being here for me." His last meal was a beef chimichanga with salsa and guacamole, a double cheeseburger with all the fixings, fries, Rocky Road ice cream, and a Diet Pepsi. Richard Lynn Bible, June 30, 2011, lethal injection. In May 1987, Bible was released from prison after serving a sentence for kidnapping and essay that had been imposed in 1981. Just over a year later, tragedy struck again. 9-year-old Jennifer Wilson set out on her bicycle to ride the short distance to her family's ranch near Flagstaff. She never made it home. For 3 agonizing weeks, her family and authorities searched. Then her naked body was discovered beneath a tree, concealed under branches. Her hands had been bound tightly behind her back. On the very day Jennifer's body was found, Bible visited his brother, driving a Blazer-style vehicle. He claimed it belonged to a friend, but in reality, it had been stolen. Not long afterwards, police attempted to stop him. Bible fled in a high-speed chase, but was caught behind the wheel of the same stolen vehicle, now hastily repainted a different color. Within hours of his arrest, Bible admitted to stealing the GMC and even confessed to repainting it just 2 hours before being captured. Investigators searching the vehicle uncovered dozens of rubber bands scattered inside, but none of the bags they would have come from. The steering column had been crudely cut open, with a piece of metal from the job lying on the floorboard. They also discovered a case of 20 miniature bottles of Suntory vodka, with 2 missing. At the site where Jennifer's body was hidden, the detectives found 2 identical bottles. Rubber bands matching those in Bible's possessions were strewn across the area as well. But the most damning evidence came from what was, at the time, one of Arizona's earliest DNA cases. A bloodstain on the shirt Bible was wearing at his arrest was tested and determined to be Jennifer Wilson's blood. With the physical evidence, his prior criminal record, and the DNA linking him directly to the child's murder, Bible was convicted and sentenced to death. His final words were, "I want to thank my family and my lawyers. I love them all and everything's okay. That's it." His last meal was 4 eggs with cheese, hash browns, biscuits and gravy, peanut butter and jelly, and chocolate milk. Thomas Paul West, July 19, 2011, lethal injection. In the summer of 1987, West first met 55-year-old Donald Bortle, who lived in a trailer outside Tucson. West and some friends had gone there to buy electronic equipment that Bortle had advertised for sale. 2 weeks later, West returned alone, but this time with far darker intentions. Once inside the trailer, he bound and gagged Bortle, then brutally beat him. After ransacking the home, West stole numerous items along with Bortle's car. He transported the stolen goods to Phoenix, where he planned to sell them for cash. While in Phoenix, West confided to several acquaintances about what he had done. One of them decided to alert authorities and contacted the Pima County Sheriff's Office, urging deputies to check on Bortle. On July 17, 1987, a deputy entered the trailer and discovered a horrific scene. Bortles' lifeless body was still tied up and gagged. He had died from massive blunt force trauma to the head. By then, West had fled Arizona, hoping to escape capture, but his run from the law didn't last long. Not long after the murder, he was pulled over during a traffic stop in Illinois. Inside his vehicle, police found 4 boxes filled with Bortles' belongings, primarily electronic equipment, the very goods he had stolen from the trailer. He had no last words and no final special meal. Robert Henry Mormon, February 29, 2012, lethal injection. In January 1984, Mormon was serving a sentence of 9 years to life at the Arizona State Prison in Florence for kidnapping. That month, he was granted a rare 72-hour compassionate furlough to spend time with his adoptive mother, 74-year-old Roberta, who had taken a bus to visit him. Together, they checked into the Blue Mist Motel in Florence. Not long into the visit, the situation turned deadly. Mormon bound and gagged his mother before strangling and stabbing her to death. He then dismembered her body into numerous pieces, which he discarded in dumpsters across the city in an attempt to conceal the crime. Suspicion quickly grew after neighbors noticed his bizarre behavior and the fact that his mother was missing. At one point, Mormon even approached a corrections officer in the motel parking lot, asking where he might dispose of what he described as 25 pounds of spoiled hamburger meat his parents had brought with them. The officer, not realizing what Mormon was truly hiding, suggested he contact his prison unit. Just after midnight on Saturday, January 14, Mormon called the lieutenant in charge of his unit. He asked for assistance, claiming that his cousin had recently dropped off dog bones and other items that he needed to throw away. He also added that his mother was out visiting at the time and that the motel dumpster was already full. His last words were, "I hope this will bring closure and start the healing now, and I hope they will forgive me in time." His last meal was a double hamburger, French fries, 2 beef burritos, 2 14-ounce containers of Rocky Road ice cream, and 3 colas. Robert Charles Towery, March 8, 2012, lethal injection. In the early 1990s, Towery targeted a man who had once trusted and helped him. His victim, 68-year-old Mark Jones, was a wealthy Paradise Valley philanthropist who had known Towery as his mechanic. Jones had even loaned him money in the past. On the night of the crime, Towery and his accomplice, Randy Barker, went to Jones's home under the pretense of a friendly visit. Because of their prior relationship, Jones welcomed them inside. Once in the house, the men revealed their true intentions. Towery pulled a pistol while Barker restrained Jones with handcuffs. As Towery gathered valuables from the house, loading them into Jones's own vehicle, Barker led Jones to a bedroom. Towery then told Jones that he was going to give him something to help him sleep. What Jones didn't know was that Towery filled the syringe not with a sedative, but with battery acid. Trusting him, Jones did not resist as Towery injected the lethal substance into his body. When that did not kill him quickly enough, Towery resorted to strangulation. His first attempt failed, but on his second try, he succeeded in taking Jones's life. The men then fled the home in Jones's car, later unloading the stolen property at their own residences before abandoning the vehicle in a nearby parking lot. On September 5, 1991, Jones's body was discovered. 2 years later, on September 12, 1993, authorities recovered his abandoned car. A crucial tip to the Silent Witness program eventually led police to Towery and Barker. When investigators searched their homes, they recovered some of Jones's stolen possessions. In exchange for testifying against Towery, Randy Barker was allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder. He served just 10 years in prison before being released. Towery, however, faced the death penalty. In his last words, Towery apologized to his family and to the victims. He talked about bad choices he had made. Then he said, as he appeared to be crying, "I love my family." Potato, potato, potato. His reference to potatoes was a message to a nephew who witnessed the execution and referred to the sound made by a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Towery's attorney, Dale Bake, said it was Towery's way of telling his nephew that everything was okay. His last meal was porterhouse steak, sautéed mushrooms, baked potato with butter and sour cream, steamed asparagus, clam chowder, Pepsi, milk, and apple pie with vanilla ice cream. Thomas Arnold Kemp, April 25, 2012. Lethal injection. In 1992, a college student named Hector Juarez was ambushed outside his apartment complex. As he arrived home, he was confronted by Donald Kemp and his accomplice, Jeffrey Logan. The two men forced Juarez into his own car at gunpoint and held him captive as they drove to a nearby ATM. Under duress, Juarez was forced to withdraw cash from his account, which they stole before taking him to a remote area. There, Kemp and Logan executed him with a gunshot. After killing Juarez, the men stole his car and fled Arizona, heading north to Colorado. Along the way, their violence continued. They kidnapped a couple in Colorado, holding them against their will. Eventually, the couple managed to escape, and when Logan was captured, he turned against Kemp. Logan confessed to authorities, telling them how the two men had forced Juarez to withdraw money before murdering him. At trial, Kemp's lack of remorse was chilling. He told the court that his only real mistake had been not killing Logan as well, and he referred to Juarez using a racial slur, insisting that the young man did not deserve to live. Logan was tried first, convicted of the murder, and sentenced to life in prison. Kemp, however, faced the death penalty sentence for his role as the triggerman and the one who displayed clear intent to kill. His last words were, "I regret nothing." His last meal was a cheeseburger, fries and root beer, boysenberry pie with strawberry ice cream. Samuel Villegas Lopez, June 27, 2012, lethal injection. In 1986, the quiet life of Estefana Holmes, a 59-year-old grandmother and seamstress who lived alone, was brutally cut short. Police discovered her half-naked body inside her modest home in Phoenix, where the scene bore the marks of a frenzied and sadistic attack. She had been blindfolded and gagged with her own clothing before being subjected to extreme violence. Holmes had suffered 3 major stab wounds to her head, one across her face, and an additional 23 stab wounds to her breast and upper chest. Her throat had been slashed, and the force of the attack left blood splattered across the kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom walls. The brutality of the crime suggested both rage and essay. Investigators collected genetic material samples from her body, but at first the killer's identity remained unknown. Less than a week later, however, police arrested Jose Lopez for a separate essay. When forensic testing was conducted, the evidence collected from Holmes's body was matched to Lopez, directly linking him to the murder. The shocking details of the case, coupled with Lopez's connection to another violent essay, sealed his fate in court. He did not have any last words. His last meal was 1 red and 1 green chili burrito, Spanish rice, jalapeno, avocado, cottage cheese, French fries, vanilla ice cream, and pineapple. Daniel Wayne Cook, August 8, 2012, lethal injection. In July 1987, Lake Havasu City was shaken by one of the most sadistic double murders in Arizona history. Cook, along with his roommate and co-worker John Matsky, shared an apartment with Carlos Froyan Cruz Ramos. The 3 men all worked at the same restaurant, but simmering tensions escalated when Cook stole money from Cruz Ramos. When Cruz Ramos began searching the apartment for the missing cash, Cook and Matsky launched a prolonged and vicious attack. They tied Cruz Ramos to a chair and began beating him with their fists and a metal pipe. The assault grew more depraved as Cook slashed Cruz Ramos with a knife, sodomized him, and burned his genitals with cigarettes. The torture lasted for hours before Cook and Matsky ended it by crushing Cruz Ramos's throat with the pipe, leaving him dead in the apartment. Later that night, Kevin Sweeney, another co-worker, arrived at the apartment unaware of the horror inside. Cook forced him upstairs to view Cruz Ramos's body, then tied Sweeney to a chair. While Matsky slept, Cook saw Sweeney. When he was finished, he woke Matsky and together they strangled Sweeney to death with a bed sheet. The crime might have remained hidden if not for Matsky. Racked with guilt, he went to the police, confessed, and implicated Cook in both murders. In exchange for his cooperation, Matsky was allowed to plead guilty and received a 20-year prison sentence. He served his time and was released in July 2007. Cook, however, was convicted of the double murder and sentenced to death. His last words were, "I'd like to say sorry to the victim's family. I know that's not enough. Where am I? To my lawyers, thank you. Red Robin, yum, I'm done, I love you." His last meal was eggplant lasagna, garlic cheese mashed potatoes, roasted Brussels sprouts, broiled asparagus, root beer soda, and ice cream. Richard Dale Stokely, December 5, 2012, lethal injection. During a 4th of July weekend in Elfrida, Arizona, 38-year-old Stokely and 20-year-old Randy Braziel kidnapped two teenage girls from a local fair. The girls were taken to a remote area where they were essayed. Fearing consequences, the men decided to kill the victims. Stokely made sure they did not survive by stomping on them and stabbing each of them in the right eye. He then disposed of their bodies in a mine shaft. DNA evidence later confirmed both men were involved in the crimes. The day after the incident, Stokely turned himself in to authorities, confessed, and led police to the location of the victims. Braziel later entered a plea agreement, acknowledging his involvement but attributing the killings to Stokely. He pleaded guilty to lesser charges and received a 20-year prison sentence, eventually being released in 2011. Stokely did not have any final words. His last meal was porterhouse steak, French fries, fried okra, salad with blue cheese dressing, wedge of cheddar cheese, biscuits, one apple, one peach, one banana, cream soda, and chocolate ice cream. Edward Harold Shadd Jr., October 9, 2013, lethal injection. 74-year-old Lorimer Leroy Grove was found deceased in a wooded area near a highway outside Prescott. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation, with a sash-like cord still around his neck. Grove had left his home in Bisbee 9 days earlier, driving his new Cadillac and trailer to visit his sister in Everett, Washington, and may have been carrying a substantial amount of cash. Several weeks later, Shadd was arrested in Utah while driving Groves' Cadillac. During a cross-country trip, he used Groves' credit cards and forged a check from his account. At the time, Shadd was on parole for a 1968 second-degree murder conviction in Utah. How Grove and Shadd crossed paths remained unclear, and no physical evidence directly linked Shadd to Groves' body. At trial, Shadd admitted that his multiple prior explanations for possessing Groves' Cadillac and credit cards were false. He then claimed that a French couple he met through a friend and former thief at a truck stop had exchanged cars with him. His last words were, "Well, after 34 years, I'm free to fly away home. Thank you, Warden. Those are my last words." His last meal was a 12-inch meatball submarine sandwich, a large order of French fries with ketchup, 2 ears of corn on the cob, 2 ounces of cranberry sauce, a slice of apple pie, and a 20-ounce vanilla milkshake. Robert Glenn Jones Jr., October 23, 2013, lethal injection. Jones, along with accomplices David and Scott Nordstrom, targeted the Moon Smoke Shop with the intent to commit a robbery. David stayed in the truck while Jones and Scott entered the store armed. Inside, they followed the customer, Chip O'Dell, and fatally shot him. 4 employees were present, and the man began shooting at them as well. Employee Mark Naiman, believing the others were dead, ran out and called 911. Tom Hardman was shot in the back room and killed, while another employee was wounded but survived. The two men then fled in the truck. David Nordstrom later testified that Jones admitted to shooting 2 people and Scott said he had shot one. 2 weeks later, the firefighters' union hall was robbed. Inside, 4 people, Mary Beth Munn, bartender Carol Lynn Noel, and the couple, Judy and Arthur Bell, were shot dead, and $1,300 was taken. According to David Nordstrom, Jones admitted to robbing the union hall and stated that Scott shot the bartender after she couldn't open the safe. Then Jones shot the 3 other witnesses in the head. A month later, Richard Rowells was bound with duct tape and shot in the head at his Phoenix home. Police linked Jones to purchases made with Rowells' credit card and found he was wearing Rowells' retirement watch at the time of his arrest. Jones's last words were, "Love and respect my friends and family, and hope my friends are never here." Jones declined a special last meal, so he was given the same meal provided to the other inmates at the prison, which consisted of a beef patty, mashed potatoes with brown gravy, a serving of carrots, 2 slices of wheat bread, a slice of glazed cake, and powdered juice drink. Joseph Rudolph Wood III, July 23, 2014, lethal injection. Wood had been in a turbulent 5-year relationship with his 29-year-old ex-girlfriend, Debbie Dietz, which involved multiple breakups and incidents of domestic violence. Dietz had obtained an order of protection against him. On August 7, 1989, Wood entered the body shop where Debbie worked and, after waiting for her father, Gene Dietz, to finish a phone call, shot him in the chest, killing him. He then confronted Debbie, held her, and shot her twice, once in the abdomen and once in the chest, fatally wounding her. Wood fled the scene but was confronted by two police officers. When he initially placed his weapon on the ground, he picked it up again and pointed it at them. The officers fired, hitting him multiple times. Wood survived after undergoing extensive surgery. Wood looked at the victim's family as he delivered his final words, saying he was thankful for Jesus Christ as his savior. At one point, he smiled at them, which angered the family. I take comfort knowing today my pain stops, and I said a prayer that on this or any other day you may find peace in all of your hearts and may God forgive you all. Wood chose not to have a special last meal, instead eating the sausage and mashed potatoes that the rest of the prisoners were served. Clarence Wayne Dixon, May 11, 2022, lethal injection. On the night of January 6, 1978, 21-year-old Deanna Lynn Bowdoin, a senior at Arizona State University, had dinner with her parents before meeting a friend at a nearby bar. They stayed at that bar until around midnight, after which Bowdoin left to return to her apartment in Tempe. In the early hours of January 7, her boyfriend came home and discovered her body on the bed. She had been strangled with a belt and stabbed multiple times. Genetic material was found on her underwear and private area, but at the time it could not be linked to any suspect. Bowdoin's murder remained unsolved for over 20 years. In 2001, a cold case detective ran the DNA profile through a national database and found a match to Clarence Dixon, who was serving a life sentence in Arizona for a 1986 essay. Dixon had lived across the street from Bowdoin at the time of her murder, though neither her family nor friends were aware of any connection between them. Dixon maintained his innocence in his final statement. Prior to his execution, he ate a last meal of Kentucky Fried Chicken, strawberry ice cream, and a bottle of water. Frank Jarvis Atwood, June 8, 2022, lethal injection. Vicki Lynn Hoskinson was an 8-year-old girl from Tucson, Arizona, who disappeared while riding her bicycle to mail a birthday card to her aunt. Her abductor, Frank Jarvis Atwood, was later identified through witness statements and physical evidence, which Atwood later claimed had been planted on his car. 7 months after her disappearance, Vicky's remains were found in a desert area, approximately 20 miles from where her bicycle had been left, and Atwood was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection. In his final statement, Atwood maintained his innocence and did not apologize to Vicky's family. He expressed gratitude to his fate, stating, "Thank you, precious father, for coming today and shepherding me into faith. I want to thank my beautiful wife, who has loved me with everything she has. I want to thank my friends and legal team, and most of all, Jesus Christ, through this unfair judicial process that led to my salvation. I pray the Lord will have mercy on all of us and that the Lord will have mercy on me." During the execution, witnesses described a surreal event where Atwood helped prison officials find a suitable vein for the IV line after they failed to establish one. His last meal was salami, mustard, peanut butter, jelly, wheat bread, tortilla chips, and a drink of water with a juice packet. Murray Hooper, November 16, 2022. 76-year-old Hooper was sentenced to death for his involvement in the 1980 New Year's Eve murders of William Patrick Redmond, 46, and his 70-year-old mother-in-law, Helen Genevieve Phelps. His final words were, "It's all been said, let it be done. Don't be sad for me, don't cry. I'll see you later. Let's go." Media witnesses noted that he did not appear to be in pain and made only limited movements. Observers described him as alternating between chuckling and quiet acceptance of his fate. The execution team members initially struggled to insert IVs into both arms and ultimately used the catheter in his femoral vein near the groin. Murray Hooper's final meal request before his execution included KFC, white meat extra crispy, macaroni and cheese, barbecue sauce packets, one dinner roll, cheesecakes, 2 pints of Napolitan ice cream, one large Fanta orange soda. Aaron Brian Gunches, March 19, 2025, lethal injection. On November 14, 2002, Gunches went to the Mesa, Arizona residence of his girlfriend, Catherine Letcher. Upon arriving, he found that she had been involved in a confrontation with her ex-husband, Ted Price, who had come to see her earlier that day. Price had been struck in the face with a telephone and was left disoriented on the floor. Gunches then enlisted the help of Letcher and her roommates to load Price into his vehicle, claiming he intended to take him to a bus station. However, Gunches quickly realized he did not have enough money to buy Price a ticket. Subsequently, Ganches, accompanied by an acquaintance, drove Price into the desert along the Beeline Highway, where he shot him 4 times, resulting in Price's death. According to statements from Price's sister, Letcher was struggling with methamphetamine addiction and was living in extremely poor conditions with the 2 children she shared with Price. On the day of the killing, Price allegedly threatened to contact Child Protective Services regarding Letcher, accusing her of neglecting their children. In response, Letcher contacted Ganches, who was her drug dealer at the time, and asked him to handle the situation. On January 15, 2003, Ganches was pulled over by Arizona Department of Public Safety officer Robert Flannery during a routine traffic stop. During that stop, Ganches fired at Officer Flannery, hitting him twice before fleeing the scene. The officer survived the shooting. Ganches then became the subject of an extensive manhunt involving over 50 law enforcement officers. The following day, he was located hiding in a haystack in Wendon and subsequently taken into custody. On the day of his execution, Ganches chose not to make any final statement. For his final meal, he requested a double Western burger, spicy gyros, onion rings, and baklava. And with this, my friends, we are done with the Executed in Arizona series. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.